Hey there, everyone. Ready to dive into the world of Australian student visas?
Always fascinating stuff.
It is, and we've got a really juicy provider update straight from the Australian Department of Home Affairs.
Oh, fresh off the press.
Straight from October 2024, so really need to know info. We're going to be talking about record-breaking student numbers, some intriguing new policies, and a lot of focus on making sure the system is fair for everyone.
A lot to unpack there.
Definitely. So let's jump right in. This report, right off the bat, gives us a pretty eye-popping stat. As of September 2024, there were 674,723 student visa holders in Australia.
Wow, it's a lot.
Highest number ever recorded.
Makes sense. Australia is a pretty popular destination.
It is. But here's where things get a little interesting.
I'm intrigued.
Applications actually dipped a little this year. Globally, there were just under 100,000 student visa applications lodged in the first quarter of the 2024-25 program year. That's lower than last year and even lower than what we saw back in 2018-19. So fewer applications, but more visa holders. What's the story there?
Well, one thing that pops out from the report is a shift in grant rates. See, the applications might be down globally, but the approval rate for those lodged outside Australia actually jumped up to 82.8%.
Interesting.
And on the flip side, the rate for applications submitted from within Australia dipped a bit, down to 72.9%.
So that explains why the number of visa holders is still climbing. Australia is still a magnet for those overseas students. Now, the report also points out a trend. Kind of curious. Decrease in applications across most study sectors, but higher education has stayed pretty steady.
Yeah, I noticed that too.
So what's your take on that?
Well, I think it tells us a couple of things. One, Australia's reputation for top-notch higher education is holding strong, even with all the global ups and downs. And two, maybe a change in why students are choosing Australia. Possibly more focus on postgraduate studies, more specialized fields, the stuff that usually falls under higher ed.
Makes sense. Okay, let's move on to a pretty big shift in the visa program this update talks about. The removal of Ministerial Direction 107, MD 107 for short. Now, for our listeners who might not be super familiar with all the visa lingo, can you break down what this change actually means?
Think of MD 107 as a ranking system for education providers based on their track record with, visa compliance.
Yeah.
So basically, the Department of Home Affairs could prioritize applications coming from schools with a lower risk of visa issues.
Okay, so lower risk, higher priority.
Right. Now, with MD 107 gone, the department is signaling a return to processing applications, business as usual.
Got it.
And this is mostly because they've really shrunk that backlog of offshore applications.
So does that mean they're easing up on making sure students are genuinely coming to study?
Great question. And the update is very clear on this. Absolutely not. The Department of Home Affairs is still all about what they call program integrity.
Okay, program integrity.
They're just saying that with current application numbers and their improved processing, MD 107 isn't really needed anymore.
So no less focus on integrity, just a different approach to managing things. Now, I'm curious, how might this affect someone applying for a visa? Could it change processing times at all?
It's hard to say for sure right now, but definitely something to keep an eye on. Without that ranking system based on the education provider, we might see processing times shift a bit. Some applications might be faster, others a little slower. Really depends on a bunch of factors, your specific situation, the overall volume of applications, that kind of thing.
Got it. Shifting landscape, but that focus on integrity stays strong. Now, this update also introduces this thing called the National Planning Level, or NPL. What's that all about?
So the NPL, it's basically a new system for managing the growth of the student visa program and making it even more, solid and trustworthy.
Okay, so keeping things above board.
Exactly. Think of it as the government keeping a closer watch on the whole sector. Looking at application trends, making sure both students and providers are playing by the rules.
So doubling down on making sure everything's legit, the document goes into a lot of detail about how the Department of Home Affairs is scrutinizing applications more closely, cracking down on fraud, and making sure students are doing what they're supposed to once they're here. No stone unturned, it seems.
That's right. They're definitely sending a message. Maintaining the integrity of the program is priority number one.
And why is that so important?
Well, it protects the reputation of Australian education, makes sure genuine students have a fair shot, and helps prevent exploitation. It's really crucial.
Couldn't agree more. Now, this brings us to another big stat highlighted in the report, a pretty sharp increase in student visa cancellations.
Oh, yeah, that was noticeable.
A 200% jump in the 2023-24 program year compared to the one before. That's huge. What do you think is behind that?
Well, the report mentions a few things. First, they've really ramped up the scrutiny on applications, especially those that seem fishy or might have false info. Second, we've seen more targeted compliance checks. Officials are actively looking for any breaches of visa conditions. And finally, a real push to tackle visa fraud, which unfortunately has become more common these days.
Wow, so the message is clear. Don't even think about cutting corners or giving false info. What are the consequences if someone doesn't follow the rules?
Oh, they could be pretty serious. You could straight up get your visa refused, which would obviously mean no studying in Australia.
Right.
But on top of that, you could also get hit with what's called a non-grant period.
What's that?
Basically, it means you can't even apply for another visa for a certain amount of time. Could be a few months, could be years, depends on how serious the violation was.
So yeah, honesty and transparency are absolutely crucial during that whole application process. Don't mess around.
Okay, let's talk about a question that I know comes up all the time, using loans to show you have enough money. It's a common way to pay for studies, but I know it can be confusing to figure out the requirements. What's the Department of Home Affairs' take on using loans?
Good news is, using loans is totally fine as long as you have clear documentation.
Okay, that's good to know.
The report actually outlines 4 key things visa officers will look at when you're using loans to show you have the funds.
Okay, what are...
First, they want to see proof the loan money has been given to you and where it's been deposited. Not enough to just have the approval, got to show the money's there. Second, they'll look into any collateral. So if the loan is secured against something, like property or savings, you'll need to provide details about that. Third, they'll ask about how any funds used for a deposit, like for tuition or accommodation, were saved up. Got to make sure it came from legit sources.
And finally, they check if your home country's rules allow you to transfer money for studying abroad. Might need a document from your bank confirming this.
So it's about proving the money's really available, accessible, and meant for your studies. Clarity and good documentation are key.
Absolutely.
Now, I know some students might be thinking about no collateral loans or unsecured loans. Are those okay for a visa?
Yep, generally accepted, especially if they're from registered financial institutions.
Oh,
But they will scrutinize those a bit more since there's no collateral backing them up.
right. Got to be extra careful.
They'll really look at your overall finances, income, savings, expenses, to see if you can actually support yourself while studying without going overboard with borrowed money.
Makes perfect sense. They want to make sure you're not setting yourself up for financial trouble. So yeah, being organized, transparent, and giving them all the info they need is super important when you're using loans for your student visa.
Couldn't agree more.
Now let's switch gears a bit and talk about a specific group of students, those coming to Australia through transnational education, or TNE arrangements,
Ah, yes, T&E.
sometimes called quinning programs, right? So students start their studies back home, then come to Australia to finish part of their degree.
That's right.
I was really interested in this section because I know TNE students often have unique challenges when applying for a visa.
You do.
So what are the key things this group needs to know?
Well, the document really emphasizes how important it is to get that confirmation of enrollment, or COE, on time.
Right, the COE. That's the document from your Australian school that confirms you have a place in the program and lets you apply for the visa.
Exactly. And for TNE students, timing is super important because they have to show that smooth transition from studying overseas to arriving in Australia.
Got it. Everything needs to line up perfectly.
Precisely. The document also stresses giving genuine, well-thought-out answers to those genuine temporary entrant questions on the application. GTE questions.
Right. Those are designed to figure out if you're really coming to study or if you have other reasons for applying.
Exactly. So for TNE students, it's crucial to explain how their time in Australia fits into their overall academic and career goals and highlight the specific benefits and opportunities they'll get from studying there.
So it's not enough to just say, I want to study in Australia. Got to paint a clear picture of why it's so important for them.
Right. What are their motivations? How does studying in Australia fit with their bigger aspirations?
Makes sense. And what about supporting documents? Anything specific TNE students should have ready?
Definitely. Alongside the COE and those well-crafted GTE responses, they should be ready to provide really solid supporting documentation. A detailed study plan showing their coursework and research objectives, evidence of past academic success, recommendation letters from professors or employers, anything that backs up their genuine intention to study in Australia.
So got to be proactive and thorough to prove you're serious about studying in Australia, especially when part of your studies are done overseas.
Absolutely.
And of course, meeting those English language and financial requirements is still a must for all student visa applicants, TNE students included, right?
Oh, absolutely. Those are the non-negotiables.
Now, I want to shift gears and talk about something super important, especially with all the recent focus on student rights and well-being, the new protections for migrant workers in Australia. The document mentions the government's efforts to tackle worker exploitation, especially among international students.
Yeah, a really crucial issue.
It really is. So can you tell us more about these new protections, how they aim to protect international students who are working in Australia?
Sure. One key element is a set of laws that are specifically designed to stop employers from taking advantage of someone's visa status. So employers could face big penalties, like heavy fines or even jail time, for things like underpaying workers, making them work crazy hours, or holding onto their passports or visas.
Wow, so they're serious about it.
They are. It's about creating a level playing field, making the workplace fairer and safer for everyone, regardless of their visa.
That's fantastic. Knowing there are consequences for those employers can really empower students to speak up and fight for their rights.
It can, but I know it can still be intimidating for students to come forward, especially if they're worried about repercussions. It's a valid concern.
It is. So what's being done to address that?
Well, the government realizes they need to make it safe for people to report exploitation. So they've put in place stronger protections for visa holders who report any kind of exploitation, whether they experience it themselves or witness it happening to someone else.
Okay, good to know.
This includes measures to protect the identity of anyone who reports, ensuring their privacy, and minimizing the risk of retaliation. It's all about building trust and making sure students feel safe to speak up without fear of negative consequences.
That's really encouraging. And to go along with those legal protections, the government has also launched a big information campaign aimed specifically at international students. I think that's brilliant. Because knowledge is power, right? Knowing your rights and how to report problems can really empower students who might otherwise feel lost or afraid to ask for help.
Absolutely. This campaign is all about raising awareness about worker exploitation, teaching students about their rights under Australian law, and giving them clear guidance on how to report any problems.
So it's not just about laws, it's about giving students the knowledge and resources they need to navigate the workplace safely and confidently.
Exactly. It's a multi-pronged approach, combining legal deterrence, better ways to report issues, and proactively getting information out there.
Sounds like a really positive step towards creating a fairer and more supportive environment for international students who are working in Australia.
I think so too. It sends a strong message that Australia cares about the well-being and fair treatment of its international students.
Okay, let's take a minute to recap what we've talked about so far. We started by looking at the big picture, record-breaking student visa numbers, even with a little dip in applications. Then we dug into some major changes in the program itself, including the end of Ministerial Direction 107 and the introduction of the national planning level.
Right. Big changes.
We talked about how these changes reflect a shift to a more business-as-usual way of processing applications, but without letting go of that focus on program integrity. And we stressed how important honesty and transparency are during the application process, especially when using loans for financial proof.
We also touched on some of the unique things T&E students need to keep in mind.
Right, and we wrapped up by looking at those crucial protections for migrant workers and what the government's doing to address worker exploitation, especially for international students.
A lot covered.
Yeah, it's been a pretty comprehensive look at how the Australian student visa program is evolving, wouldn't you say? And for anyone thinking about studying in Australia, there's a lot to consider. But don't worry, we're not done yet. In the next part of our deep dive, we'll dig even deeper into some of the nuances of these changes and answer some common questions. We'll also give you some practical tips for navigating the application process successfully. So stay tuned.
Looking forward to it.
Welcome back to our deep dive. Before the break, we were talking about those new protections for international students against worker exploitation. And it kind of makes me think this really fits into a bigger theme we've been seeing in this whole update.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
It's like it's not just about getting students to Australia. It's about making sure they have a good experience once they're there. A fair experience, you know?
Absolutely. Creating an environment where students can really thrive, not just academically, but, in their lives overall.
Yeah.
And that includes protecting their rights if they decide to work while studying, which, let's be real,
Right.
it's expensive to study abroad. Many students need to work part-time just to make ends meet.
Exactly. So it's really encouraging to see the government making sure those students aren't being taken advantage of.
It is. Now, speaking of navigating all the ins and outs of studying and working in Australia, let's circle back to something we talked about a bit earlier, transnational education, or TNE.
Oh yeah, TNE. Good call.
I know we have some listeners out there who might be thinking about that pathway, so let's unpack it a little more.
Yeah, great idea. As you mentioned before, TNE programs, sometimes called twinning programs, give students the chance to start their studies in their home country and then transfer to an Australian school to finish part of their degree.
Right.
Sounds like a cool way to experience two different education systems, maybe save some money along the way.
It can be.
But I imagine there are some unique hurdles for TNE students when it comes to the visa application.
Oh, for sure. They need to be extra careful in showing they truly intend to study in Australia, especially since they might be doing a big chunk of their coursework overseas.
Like-
The key is to really showcase what specific benefits they'll get from studying in Australia.
So it's not enough to just say, hey, I want to study in Australia. They need to explain why Australia is so important for their goals, both academic and career-wise.
Exactly. So what kind of things should T&E students focus on in their applications?
Well, they should highlight the unique stuff about the Australian education system that they're looking for. Maybe it's access to world-class research facilities, specialized courses they can't get back home, or maybe chances to connect with industry and do internships.
So really selling the Australian experience.
They also need to explain how studying in Australia fits into their long-term career goals, how the skills they learn will help them get jobs, whether back home or in the global market.
So painting a clear picture of how studying in Australia is a crucial step in their journey.
Right. It's not just a random choice. It's a key part of their plan.
Now, what about supporting documents? Anything specific T&E students should be ready to show? Absolutely. On top of the usual stuff like their confirmation of enrollment and financial statements, T&E students might want to include a detailed study plan that outlines their research objectives. Evidence of any relevant work experience, internships, even letters of support from professors or potential employers in Australia. The more they can show to back up their intentions, the better.
So it's about going above and beyond, really proving their commitment.
Exactly. Now, shifting gears a bit, let's talk about something that could be a real headache for student visa applicants. That genuine temporary entrant requirement, or GTE.
Now, the GTE, I bet that causes a lot of stress.
It does. Basically, it's how the Australian government figures out if your main reason for coming to Australia is really to study, or if you're using the student visa for something else, like working or trying to immigrate permanently.
Right, got to make sure the system's being used the right way.
Exactly. So how do they figure out if someone's a genuine temporary entrant? Well, they look at a bunch of things. Your immigration history, ties to your home country, your finances, the course you've chosen, your overall study and career plans. They're trying to see if everything adds up. If your story makes sense and supports your claim that you'll study in Australia for a bit and then head back home.
So it's not just about filling out a form, it's about telling your story in a way that convinces them.
Right, and that's where it can get tricky, especially for students from countries with a history of visa overstays or those studying something that could lead to permanent residency.
Ah, yeah, those red flags.
They need to be super careful in explaining their intentions and backing up their claims.
So what would you say to those students who are facing those extra challenges? What's the best approach?
Be upfront, be honest. Acknowledge the concerns they might have and then explain in detail your situation and your genuine reasons for wanting to study in Australia temporarily. Highlight things like ties to your home country, family commitments, career goals back home, anything that shows you plan to return after your studies.
So address the elephant in the room and give them a convincing alternative story.
Exactly. Don't avoid those sensitive topics. Use them as a chance to show you're honest and that you're serious about sticking to the rules of your visa.
Great advice. Now, let's talk money, the financial side of things. We all know studying abroad can be expensive, and Australia is no exception. So how much money do students actually need to show to convince the Australian government they can support themselves during their studies?
Well, there's no magic number, but the Department of Home Affairs does give some guidelines on their website. They generally want students to show they have enough money to cover their tuition fees, living expenses, travel costs, and any other expenses for the whole time they'll be studying.
Okay, so it's about proving you can cover everything, not just the initial costs.
Right. Now, what happens if a student doesn't quite meet those financial requirements? Are there other things they can do?
That's a good question.
Sometimes they can show proof of a scholarship or support from a sponsor, like a family member or a government agency.
Okay, so there are
They
options.
might also think about taking a shorter course or studying part-time to keep costs down.
So it's not a dead end if you don't have a ton of money saved up, but you need to be proactive and explore different avenues.
Exactly. Now, we've talked a lot about the rules and what students need to do, but let's flip it around for a minute.
Okay.
What about the perks of choosing Australia as a study destination? What makes it stand out?
That's a great point. Why Australia?
Well, Australia offers a lot, both in terms of education and just, life in general. First off, their education system is world-class, with top-ranked universities and a big focus on research and innovation. Australian degrees are recognized and respected globally, which can open doors to awesome career opportunities, both in Australia and worldwide.
So it's not just about getting a degree, it's about getting a degree that's valued everywhere.
Right. Plus, Australia is known for being welcoming and multicultural.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
It's a real melting pot, which makes it a vibrant and inclusive place for international students. And then there's the lifestyle. Stunning beaches, diverse landscapes, exciting cities, and a relaxed outdoorsy culture. It's a great place to live, study, and explore.
Sounds like the perfect combo, top-notch education, welcoming people, and a fantastic lifestyle. No wonder Australia is such a magnet for international students.
It really is. Now, while we're talking about the benefits, we should mention the post-study work rights that are available to international students.
Oh, yeah, tell me more about those.
This is a big one. Basically, it means students can get valuable work experience in Australia after they graduate.
So they can actually put their skills to use.
Exactly. And that can be a huge advantage when they're looking for jobs later on, whether they stay in Australia or go back home.
So how long can students actually stay and work after they finish their studies?
It depends on what kind of degree they get. For example, a bachelor's degree usually gets you a 2-year post-study work visa. A master's or a doctoral degree might mean you can stay even longer.
So it's a real chance to build your resume and get some international experience.
It is. Now, I know choosing the right course and the right institution is a big deal for any student.
Huge decision.
But it's even more important for international students who are investing so much time and money.
For sure.
So what advice would you give to students who are trying to figure out where to study in Australia? There are so many choices.
It can be overwhelming.
It can. First piece of advice, do your research. Dig deep. Look at university websites, see what courses they offer, read reviews from other students, reach out to current students or alumni to get their perspective. Think about what you're interested in, your career goals, your personality. Do you want a big city campus or a smaller, more close-knit environment? A school that's super specialized in your field or one with lots of options?
So it's about finding that perfect fit, right? Academically, professionally, and personally.
Exactly. And don't be afraid to look beyond the big game universities. Consider those smaller, maybe more specialized institutions. You might find some hidden gems that are a perfect match for you.
I love that advice. Think outside the box. Explore everything.
Exactly. Now, once you've narrowed it down, what's next?
Okay, so you've got your short list of schools and courses. What then?
Time to start getting your application together. Pay close attention to the admission requirements, the deadlines, all the documents you need. Don't be shy about contacting the admissions team in each school if you've got questions or need anything clarified.
So organization, being proactive, paying attention to detail, that's crucial.
Absolutely. And one last tip, start early. Don't wait till the last minute. The visa process can take a while, and there are often deadlines you need to meet.
Starting early always makes things less stressful.
It does. Well, we've covered a lot in this section. The perks of studying in Australia, the ins and outs of applying for a visa, that tricky GTE requirement, the financial stuff. I think our listeners have a good foundation now to navigate this whole world of Australian student visas.
I agree. It's exciting, but it can be daunting. So we've tried to break it down.
Definitely. And as with anything related to immigration, it's always smart to stay updated and get professional advice if you need it.
Absolutely. If you have specific questions or concerns, don't hesitate to talk to a registered migration agent or an education agent. They can give you personalized advice and help you through the whole process.
Great advice. And stay tuned for the final part of our deep dive.
Coming up next, we'll wrap things up and leave you with some final thoughts on the future of international education in Australia. And we're back. It's been quite a journey exploring Australian student visas.
It has. We've dug into the numbers, the policies, the whole shebang.
We have. So thinking big picture now, given all these changes, what do you see for the future of international students in Australia? What's your take?
Seems like Australia's trying to walk this tightrope, right?
Yeah.
On one side, they clearly value international students, all they bring to the country. The economy, society, culture, you name it.
Yeah, they're a huge part of the fabric of Australia.
Absolutely. But on the other side, they're also really serious about protecting their visa program, making sure it's not being misused.
Right. Got to find that balance.
It's all about attracting those students who are genuinely passionate about studying, who are committed to the experience.
Exactly. And as we talked about, that means tougher scrutiny, showing your intentions are real, and more checks once students are actually in Australia.
Right. Higher standards all around.
Makes you wonder, could this kind of ripple out? Could we see other countries doing similar things?
Oh, definitely possible. As more countries try to attract international students, they're going to be watching how Australia handles this. If they can keep a strong education system and protect their visa program, others might follow suit.
It's like a test case for how to manage international education in this crazy world.
Exactly. The next few years will be interesting, that's for sure.
Well, this has been an amazing deep dive into Australian student visas. We've uncovered so much from this provider update.
It was a goldmine of information.
It was. And I think our listeners now have a really solid grasp of what's happening and what to expect if they're thinking about studying in Australia.
Absolutely. We've covered everything from the specific visa rules to the big trends shaping the future of international education.
And if you're hungry for even more info, you'll find links to the full document and other helpful resources in the show notes.
Always good to keep learning.
A massive thank you to all our listeners for joining us on this deep dive. Hope you've gained some valuable insights and maybe even a few aha moments along the way.
It's been a pleasure exploring this with you all.
Stay curious, everyone, and remember, the world is your classroom. Until next time.